Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our short session this morning for 30 minutes. And Tim Baker's my name, and I'm going to talk about job descriptions today. And of course, we all know about job descriptions. And my suggestion is that we need to move towards role descriptions. Now, it might seem like a very strange thing to say, and it might sound like I'm just talking semantics, but I'm not. And I'll explain all that, of course, in the short time we've got together. This material comes from my latest book, which will be out in May, June, which is The Future of Human Resources, Unlocking Human Potential. And I'm going to talk about one of the chapters in the book in terms of turning job descriptions into role descriptions. Okay, so let's just so if those of you who don't know me, I'm a keynote speaker, I'm an executive coach, I'm an author of 14 books, of which one of them, of course, is The Future of Human Resources. And you can see that I also play a little bit of rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. So keep myself pretty active. And today I'm actually in Canberra and doing some work down here. And the weather is just starting to change. It's getting a little bit cooler here in Canberra, which is quite normal. I'm sure you'd be aware. All right, so let's talk about the topic. Now, probably the main objection or the main concern when people see the topic like this is, isn't a role description just another label for a job description? Well, no, it's not. It has a fundamentally different approach. I think that job descriptions have been pretty much artifacts of the last century, and I don't think they serve us very well at all. And in fact, you know, there are Dilbert-style jokes that are made about job descriptions, and we all know those things. And very rarely have I seen a job description so well written that it really encompasses everything that a person actually is expected to do at work. So let's talk about that a little further. I really want to talk about the inadequacy of the job description. And I wrote a book in 2015 called The End of the Job Description, because I felt that job descriptions were very much an artifact of the last century. So now we wanted to talk about job roles. And I'm going to talk about non-job roles very much this morning. And at the end of this presentation, I've got a very special offer that I will explain to you shortly. Now, Frederick Taylor, who I think is probably the most influential management consultant in history, obviously spent a fair bit of time working on scientific management. In fact, his book, The Principles of Scientific Management, although it was published early in the 19, early, I think it was around 1908 or something like that, is still doing extremely well on Amazon. And that's the book. And of course, Taylor went into, and he's famous for this, he went into the Ford assembly line, and he basically looked at each of the jobs that people were doing along the assembly line. And he kind of looked at how things could be done in the most efficient and effective way. And this is what he was referring to as time and motion studies. So he expected people who are putting the wheels on the car to do it in a certain way. The people who put the paintwork on the car, they do it in a certain way. And everything was very systemized to follow a particular process. Now, we're still following a lot of his principles now, even in 2022, because scientific management is still alive and well. And if you buy, for example, a franchise business, you're actually buying a set of systems, and it's very much based on the principles of scientific management. I mention this because the job description itself came out of this whole period of time, and the job description was there to detail very specifically what people were expected to do at each stage of production. I think it's quite amusing that this little disclaimer goes at the end of every job description. I'm sure you've seen it, and that is, you're required to complete any other duties deemed relevant by your manager. I'm sure you've seen that on the bottom of a job description. And of course, it is very amusing, because what it's basically saying is that everything that's in this document isn't conclusive. So in other words, there are other things that are expected of you that aren't listed on the job description, which really begs the question, why can't we get everything written on the job description that really entails what a person is supposed to do at work? I think a lot of that I'll explain and be a little clearer as I go through my short session this morning. So let's have a look at this in a little bit more detail. When you look at performance management frameworks in organizations, you probably see something like this. Most organizations have a vision. Now they sort of call it a purpose statement, but organizations need to have a vision. That is, of course, where they want to go. And the mission is how they get there. So this is a statement about how the business is going to achieve that vision. And normally there's a set of guiding values or core values that an organization follows. And then from there, we have a role description or a job description. And essentially, these are small bite-sized pieces of the total amount of work done in an organization, and everyone gets a piece of the action. And it should, of course, be very consistent with the vision, mission, and core values of an organization. And then, of course, in the job description, we have what we call key result areas. And normally there are 5 to 8 different key result areas that people are accountable for in their work. And from there are key performance indicators, which is how we'll measure success in each of those areas. Now, some of the measurements, of course, are quantitative and some are qualitative. Quantitative meaning, of course, that we have numbers attached to them. So, for example, it might be the number of sales expected. Qualitative, on the other hand, is for people to follow systems, follow processes and make sure that they dot I's and cross T's. And not everything, of course, can be measured by a number. And then people are given targets. So ultimately, there it is. There's the framework for performance in organizations. And of course, what I'm going to focus on here is that area that's called role descriptions or job descriptions, and talk a little bit about the distinction between the two. So let's talk about that. Now, I'm going to make a provocative statement here, but I think it's very true. And that is that the roles that people play in organizations are actually more important than the jobs they do. Now, that might seem like a very strange statement to make, because let's face it, people are recruited on the basis of their technical capability. So here am I saying that the roles that people play in organizations are more important than the jobs they do. Now, I hope that I can convince you of that when I go through the next couple of slides. And I think herein lies the problem, that job descriptions don't capture non-job roles. And therefore, non-job roles get bypassed in the performance management framework. So if we have a look at this, and this comes from my book, The End of the Job Description, I just wanted to share with you a model from that book. If you think about the work that people do, it's actually two-dimensional. So one dimension of the work that people do is the job they actually are hired to do. Now, that is, of course, captured in the job description, or it should be captured in the job description. And ultimately, it's really about people having certain technical skills to do the job, regardless of what it is, whether it's, skilled or unskilled or whatever. People are expected to have certain technical skills, and most of that's covered in the job description. However, there is another dimension that goes missing in the job description largely, and that is what I call non-job roles. And I suggest to you that there are 4 non-job roles that are critically important in your business, in everybody's business. And in fact, academics have been looking at non-job roles now for about 25 years. So it's not a new concept. And if you look at the literature in this area, people will often say, well, it's not really possible to come up with a generic set of non-job roles that are applicable right across the board, and I believe it is. And what I've done is I've identified 4 non-job roles in this book and in my book, The Future of Human Resources. And I'd like to just share with you these 4 non-job roles that I think are critically important. And rarely, if ever, are they actually captured in the job description. So we've got one non-job role that I think is really important, is having a positive attitude and enthusiasm. Now, I don't expect people to come to work bouncing off the walls with excitement, but by the same token, I don't think it's appropriate for people to come to work whinging, whining, complaining, playing politics and so on. And yet, if you think about it, it wouldn't take you long to have thought about somebody at work who actually exhibits those sorts of traits which are counter to the non-job role of positive attitude and enthusiasm. Of course, we know that attitude and enthusiasm is infectious, and we know that one person who has a negative attitude can adversely affect the people around them very easily. And so I would suggest to you that that is a critically important non-job role that people should exhibit in a working environment. We all have our bad days, of course, but to have somebody whining and whinging non-stop about work, I don't think is acceptable in any workplace, because basically what it does is it drags everybody down, doesn't it? Another non-job role that I think is critically important is the team role. We expect people to operate in a team, don't we? We want people to basically, be a team player. And again, how often have you found people saying to you in the workplace that I'm just an individual, I just come to work and I do my job, and they might even challenge you and say it's not written anywhere in my job description that I need to be a team player. But yet, as we know, teams are now the foundational building block of organisations, and we expect people to operate in a team environment. And some of those teams, of course, are functional, and some of them are non-functional, some of them project-based, and some of them are not. But at the end of the day, being a team player is a critically important attribute now and will be for the future. The third non-job role that I wanted to talk about is what I might call a skill development role. Now, what I mean by that is that people actually need to continually grow and develop their skill set. Because the world is moving so rapidly, it's not really appropriate for people to just stick to their knitting, so to speak. People are expected to learn new skills, and people should do that for their own careers. So there's obviously a self-interest for that as well. But also the organisation does benefit greatly from people who are continuing to grow and develop. But here again, how often have you heard people say, oh, I'm too old to go to that training course, send somebody else? Or maybe they might say, well, I'm comfortable using this approach or this type of software, and I don't really want to, learn to use another system. And this is, of course, something that we see all the time. So I think that's non-negotiable. I think, and again, it's not obviously written in the job description as such. So I think that's a critically important role that people are expected to play in terms of developing performance at work. Now, whereas the job development role is very much about the individual, the last role that I'm going to share with you is very much about the organisation or the workplace, and that is the innovation and continuous improvement role. It is reasonable to expect people to come to work bringing their thoughts and ideas with them and not leaving their brains in a paper bag at the gate. But many, many employees, of course, believe that it is the team leader's role to come up with all the good ideas. And I don't think that's necessarily the case, because obviously the leader can't, the leader's not going to think of everything. So we want people to bring their ideas and their thoughts and so forth to work. So you can see what I'm getting at here is that these things that are on the right-hand side are often left out of the job description. And I mean, if they are in the job description, and some of you might be thinking, well, hang on, we do make reference to these things, but I'll guarantee that they're not made reference to the same extent of the non-job role, the job roles. I'll guarantee that they're usually bullet points at the end of the document, implying, of course, that they're less important than the technical skills that people have to do their job. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to give them the same status, that is, the non-job roles, the same status as job roles. Now, if we do that, then we're getting a more comprehensive performance framework for people at work. So what I'm really suggesting here is that people actually have 5 roles to play at work. What are those roles? They have a job role, they have a positive attitude and enthusiasm role, they have a team role, they have a skill development role, and they have an innovation and continuous improvement role. Now, if people are exhibiting all of those roles, then they're performing at a high level, in my view. And if you're doubting what I'm saying here, just think about a team of highly skilled people. So, you know, these people could be engineers or whatever they might be. They've got great skills, but each of them have got a terrible attitude. Each of them are individuals, not team players. Each of them have stopped growing and developing in their career. And each of them have no vested interest in helping the organisation be more efficient and effective. Now, that's not likely to be a very productive team, regardless of their technical capabilities. Now, if you're doubting this, a bit of research that was done by John Warner a few years ago, 9,000 people were asked. Now, these 9,000 people were employers. And these employers were asked, what are the main valued job attributes that you're looking for in employees? All right, so it was a frequency survey. So people just had to write down what they thought was the most valued job attribute that a person could bring to work with them. And here's a list. The first, and of course, these things won't surprise you, but I'm wanting to make a very important point here. So enthusiasm. People want people who are enthusiastic and positive. People want good communicators. Employers want self-motivated, people who are basically self-motivated. People also want people who are honest. They want people who actually enjoy engaging with other people, because at the end of the day, the workplace is full of people, regardless of whether they work remotely or not. It's still a case that, you know, people have to work together. Employers want people who are persistent. You know, once they decide on something, they stick at it and go ahead and do it. They also want people who will work in a team effectively. They also want good communication or organizational skills, or the ability to work under pressure. That becomes critically important as well. And finally, the second last one is they want people who are willing to grow and learn. And they also want someone that's very dependent and dedicated to their work. Now, what's interesting about this list, and remember, when Warner did this research, he didn't ask people to stick with technical skills or non-technical. He just said, basically, the question was, what's the most valued job attributes? So at the end of the day, if you look at those 10 things, you'll see there's something very clearly in common. None of them are job roles. None of them have to do with the technical aspects of what people do. So what basically employers want is they want people who have a series of non-job role attributes that they can bring to work with them. So it's really underscoring my point that the non-job roles that people do is just as, if not more important than the job roles that people do. Because let's face it, when we recruit somebody, we tend to do it because of course, it's a prerequisite that they've got the technical skills. And I mean, if you don't have the technical skills, you're not even going to get a look at in your resume. But of course, if you've got those, that's not the end of it, because now we're talking about other attributes that are critically important. But yet in the job interview, what do? We talk to people about their technical skills only, and we basically make assumptions about people's non-job capabilities. And of course, we may find out 3 or 4 months into their career that they perhaps don't have some of these attributes. So you can see what I'm getting at here when I talk about non-job roles. So what's a job description? So a job description usually defines a set of specific tasks and responsibilities. So you can see that the job description is only one dimension of a person's performance. And of course, albeit an important dimension, but nevertheless only one dimension. Whereas the non-job, the role description actually, certainly in my view, I mean, I know there are different interpretations of this, but my interpretation of a role description is it defines the job role, which is the technical tasks we just had a look at before, and the non-job roles that employees are expected to perform at work. So in other words, what we're doing is creating a document which identifies 5 roles, the job role and the 4 non-job roles I went through. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, my goodness, this is going to take a lot of work. We've just written our job descriptions. I can see the sense in what you're saying. How do I possibly do this? Well, it's not that difficult, assuming, of course, that your job description is written well. Then all you've got to do is bolt onto that job description a number of other key result areas, which of course are the non-job roles. And what you do is you elevate their relevance up the pole, so that when people can have conversations with people, you can have conversations with people about, you know, their attitude, or you can have conversations with people about their ability to work in a team. And you should be having conversations with people, but of course managers don't do that for a very good reason. They don't do it because they're worried about being seen as subjective, and they're worried about the fact that these things aren't actually usually listed in any great detail in the job description. So we bypass these 4 non-job roles that I talked about earlier. So just quickly, just mindful of time, let's have a quick look at some of the attributes, if you like, of these non-job roles. So a positive attitude and enthusiasm probably encompasses, I would suggest, 2 dimensions. I want people who are solution focused, who basically don't just come running to the manager as soon as, you know, they can't work something out and the manager will sort it out for them. I also want people, as I'm sure you do, who can act autonomously. They can make decisions. They can have prudent, independent judgments that they can make about, you know, without having to run for the manager every time they want to check something out. So that's what there's 2 dimensions that I would think would be quite important. The other one I think is important is I just want people who've got a positive energy, a positive vibe about them around the office, because obviously, as I said earlier, that is infectious. And I think it's reasonable that we expect that people are going to have a bad day here and there, but we don't want people to have a bad day every day. Okay, now the team role, I think, is, I expect that if people are exhibiting a team role, then they should be open to the influence of others, but they also should be willing to influence in the right place at the right time in the right way. So I'd be expecting a good team player would speak up at a meeting when they needed to. I'd be expecting that a team player would be accountable for 2 things. One is their individual work, but also for the ultimate outcome of the team. And they should be able to juggle those 2 accountabilities or responsibilities. The skill development role, I think, covers 2 broad areas. One is self-development, that is developing oneself, which might be around things like emotional intelligence and time management, these sorts of things that we do on a regular basis now. And then, of course, you've got the technical side of things. People should be continually growing and developing their technical capabilities to keep up with whatever the latest thinking is on whatever it is. So I'm just giving you a sense of what these look like. And then the continuous improvement role, I expect people to be able to solve problems on their own, to be able to think, critically think, think through issues and come up with a plan A and a plan B. I expect that. I would also expect that everything that people say, think and do inside any organization should have the customer or the end user in mind, because ultimately the only reason that I'm talking to you is because I've got clients. Let's face it, the only reason that you're listening to me is that you've probably got clients, customers or end users. And we completely lose sight of this at different points. So I like to think that innovation and continuous improvement is couched in the terms of how it will benefit the end user. And there are many dimensions, of course, of innovation and continuous improvement. There's quality and time and costs and output, safety, deadlines. There's interpersonal cooperation, and of course, there's streamlining systems and processes. All of these things are open to continuous improvement. And I believe that we've got a long way to go before we get people completely engaged in this non-job role. So the question then, just to finish up our time together, is how do you formulate these role descriptions? Where do you start? Well, of course, you can have a look at the book, as I said, the end of the job description, or if you'd like to see how it fits into the full scheme of the future of human resources, grab a hold of my latest book. But I think there's a couple of ways. There's a dynamic duo method. So if you've got two people doing the same job, get them together and get them to craft out the non-job roles and how they apply to their particular areas. Because, if I said to you, being a team player is one of the non-job roles, that can mean different things in different circumstances. So what does that look like? You can also, of course, if you've got a team of people who all do the same job, you can get the team to work together to work out how they might interpret those four non-job roles. You've got, if you're the supervisor, you can sit down with the incumbent in the position and work it out together. And of course, you could get the single employee, particularly for a new job. So a brand new role in an organization might require the individual to actually craft their role description. But the important point I'm making here is that you'll notice that we're getting the people who are enacting that role description involved in the formation of the role descriptions, because obviously if you get them involved in it, then they feel a little more commitment to it. As the old saying says, that people don't argue with their own data. So they will be more likely to, believe in the things that they have, that they have contributed to those non-job roles. So, folks, that's it there for me in terms of that. I'd just like to mention that we're going to change tack next week, and I want to talk about the four. I wanted to talk about the four ways that you can influence. And I wrote a book about that, and I'd like to talk to you about that next week. So if you're looking at trying to build your influencing capability, which you should be, because we're all in the business of influence, join me next Friday on the 1st of April. And that will be at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Just for 30 minutes, I'm going to run through with you some information on that. And of course, you can see that there's a link there. So you can just click on the link. Now, I'll be sending you a copy of the slides and the recording sometime today. So you'll get a copy of that. And you just have to click on that just as you've done today. Love to see you next week. And if you've got other colleagues in your organizations that would benefit from these short, sharp, bite-sized pieces, then please circulate the link. I'd be happy for you to do that. Now, the other thing I'd like to do is offer you a a little special deal, there's the book that I'm referring to next week, which is the new influencing toolkit. Now, its recommended retail price is $77. If you go and look on Amazon, you'll find it's about that price, certainly in Australia at least. And a lot of that's got to do with the exchange rate. So it's probably a little pricey, but I'm certainly willing to give you a copy of that book for $29 plus postage today. All you've got to do is send me an email by the close of business today saying, I'd like a copy of your book, and I will arrange to get that out to you and an invoice. I'll sign it for you, and you'll get a copy of that book in the very near future. So that's my special little offer for you being here today. So folks, that's it from me. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. And so thank you. I hope you found some of that useful, maybe a little bit thought-provoking. And I hope that you're thinking a little bit differently about your job descriptions and how they're not really as effective as we might like to think. And I'd like to hope that we can see you next week, and we will do this all again and talk about influencing capabilities next week. So thank you everyone for joining me, and don't forget to circulate this information to other people in your organizations that might benefit from some of this. And I just wish you all a happy weekend, and look forward to catching up next Monday. Thanks everyone. Thank you and goodbye.